My name is Brittney Rogers. I'm from New York Sea Grant. I'm going to be the host again today. Welcome to the webinar. This is the third of 4 webinars as part of the Fall 2015 Watercraft Inspection Steward Program webinar series. Today's webinar is actually going to be a little bit different than the past 2 that we've had. We have 4 professionals here today who are going to present to you about their watercraft inspection programs. Before we get started, I do have some housekeeping items to cover quickly. So today's webinar will be recorded and it will be available on demand after the live session. Through a link that if you have not gotten it already, I will provide to you to New York Sea Grant's website and YouTube channel. In that same email, there will also be an evaluation, and it's really appreciated if you could fill out the evaluations. It takes an average of 2 to 3 minutes, and your responses will help shape future webinars and workshops like this. So we just want to make sure that you're getting the most benefit out of it and you're getting what you need. I do have everybody on mute to avoid any background noises that may distract you from the presentation. I do highly recommend that you submit any questions that you might have by typing them into the chat box on the right-hand side of the screen. Send them in at any time throughout the presentations, and I will be collecting these, and we will address them in the order that they were received at the end of today's session for the question and answer portion. We might not be able to get to all of the questions, but if there are things that should be answered by email or can be answered by email, we can go ahead and do that as well. If your question, this is a little bit different than normal, so if your question is specific for one presenter, please go ahead and make sure you state that. So you can say this is for Dave, this is for Megan, or just type their name somehow so that we know who the question is directed at. Otherwise, if you do not specify, I will go ahead and assume that you are asking your question to any of the presenters and that anyone can answer. There's about 20 minutes that we have designated at the end for everybody to go ahead and ask the questions that they may have. So with that being said, I'm going to give a quick introduction to our presenters and kind of what this webinar is about to get everyone on the same page and understanding what's going on. So the agenda, I'm going to go through our quick introduction, and then our first presenter today will be Dave Wick from Lake George. He will be presenting on his program for about 15 minutes, and then we will move on to Megan Phillips from New York State Parks, Freeman from Conesus Lake, and then lastly, Eric Holmlund from Paul Smith College. Each of these programs are ran very differently, so you're going to see as we go through how each program is different across the state. So again, Dave Wick, top left-hand side, he's our first presenter from Lake George Park Commission. They do have mandatory inspections and decontamination programs. Then we're going to move over to Megan Phillips, who has the Great Lakes Basin Boat Steward Program. Then Freeman, whose program is specific to Conesus Lake, and Eric from Paul Smith College in the Adirondacks. So just to give you guys a quick overview of the area coverage for each of the programs, you can see that the blue is Megan Phillips from New York State Parks. So they cover from Buffalo all the way up to the St. Lawrence area and some on the eastern part of New York. Dave Wick on the right-hand side over Lake George. Again, Eric Holmlund over Adirondack, and Freeman over Conesus Lake. Okay, so with that being said, I'm going to actually introduce our first presenter today, which is Dave Wick. Dave is the Executive Director of the Lake George Park Commission, which is just a small New York State agency which is solely dedicated to the long-term protection of Lake George. He has been serving in this role since 2012 after 20 years as the District Manager of Warren County Soil and Water Conservation. In his role at the Park Commission, he has been heavily engaged in invasive species issues on Lake George, including the creation of the lake-wide mandatory boat inspection program and oversight of several invasive species control programs. Dave does have his master's degree in hydrology and water resources management from the University of Wyoming, and he lives in the town of Lake George with his family.
So thanks for having me here today. I'm going to talk a little bit about Lake George, a fair amount of information to cover in a short amount of time, so I'll go pretty quickly. We can ask any questions after the fact. So on Lake George, we do have a mandatory boat inspection program for the purpose of keeping out aquatic invasive species. But what the Commission does is everything it can to protect Lake George for the future. Aquatic invasives happens to be our top priority at the moment. Right now, we're spending considerable resources on both managing the existing invasives we have and keeping new ones out. So what do we have in Lake George? We have 5 known invasive species: curly-leaf pondweed, zebra mussels, Eurasian milfoil, Asian clams, and spiny water flea. But the number on the bottom left, the $7.3 million, that's a significant chunk of money that we've been spending on invasive species over the last couple of decades. On Eurasian milfoil, just $400,000 alone this year on that one species, about another 40 or 50 on Asian clams. We're making progress, but not always as fast as we'd like. But what's out there? That's the purpose of today's talk. We have a few invasive species on the screen here that we don't have in Lake George. Top right is hydrilla, top left is quagga mussels, water chestnut, Brazilian elodea, bloody red shrimp. There's a number of others that are out there, none of which we have in our lakes, and most New York State lakes don't have these yet, so there's a lot of merit to discussing prevention strategies. This picture is a boat that came to us just last week. One of our haulers gave us a call and said, listen, I can't put this boat in the water, in a conscionable manner. He dropped by the office, and this is what we're looking at. This came from Saratoga Lake, and it was so affected we couldn't actually even decontaminate it properly, so it's what we call an uninspectable boat. But the process is that all trailer boats have to be inspected prior to launch into Lake George. We're going to talk a little bit about that. So back in 2012 and 13, the commission, just as I was coming onto the office, started getting into the idea that, if we don't put in stronger prevention measures, we have a real chance of losing the lake to some species that we don't have and we have very little ability to manage. So we went through a 2-year process, developed an environmental impact statement, and that statement came out and said, what, the best we can do for Lake George is a mandatory process where we're looking at all trailered boats before launch into Lake George. The science is pretty clear that the primary way that invasives move around our lakes is through trailered boats. They have a lot of nooks and crannies, and a lot of invasives tend to hide on those boats. So if we can take a look at these boats pretty closely, we're going to be pretty successful, we think, in trying to keep them out. So we have a pretty specific process here on Lake George. We did have 6 years of a Steward program run by the Lake George Association. That was pretty similar to some of the other programs that we're going to be talking about today. This step goes a little bit further, where it's not a voluntary effort, but it's a mandatory effort. And we have all boaters that are coming to Lake George, all trailer boaters, need to stop at one of 7 regional inspection stations to be inspected, and that has to meet a clean, drained, and dry standard. When the boat comes back out of the lake, it will be resealed. So as you go through an inspection site, you see the little tag on the bottom right, that's an inspection seal. And that says, okay, your boat is clean, it's free of invasives, go ahead and launch anywhere you'd like to on the lake. And when the boat comes back out, it's resealed, such that if you don't go anywhere else and that seal is still in place, you come back to Lake George, you don't need a new seal on your boat. It's pretty straightforward. It's modeled after Lake Tahoe, who's had this in place since about 2007, 2008. We're very lucky up here right now that we've had a lot of folks stepping up and helping to pay for this program, and there's no cost to the boater. I'll talk about that shortly. So this program, like any program, is about managing risk. Are we always going to keep everything out? Are we going to guarantee that? No, we're not. But after a number of years of research, and we said if we have the resources to implement a mandatory program, that's about as good as we can do. We think it's a pretty strong program. But we aren't looking at car top devices such as canoes and kayaks, because the science is fairly clear that they're less of a concern as a transport vector, and it's just a much more difficult boater population to manage because you can launch them anywhere into Lake George. These are the 7 inspection stations that we have. We do have about 55 people hired throughout the Lake George Park at these different inspection stations. They're open from dawn until dusk, but it does vary by season. What are the costs? The upfront cost was fairly expensive, and the annual cost is not cheap either, but at least for Lake George, we think it's worth the effort. So to buy the decontamination units, which is the top picture, that's a Landa ECOS decontamination unit. That's about $25,000 all said and done, and it's a high-pressure, high-temperature wash. Those yellow tanks hold water, and then you spray the boat down like you can see in the bottom picture. We rinse out the bilge, we rinse out the motor. Whatever happens to not meet that clean, drain, dry standard is what we take care of. Again, at no cost to the boater, The inspection takes about 5 minutes of decontamination, about another 9 to 10 minutes if needed, and the boater is free to go off and launch wherever they like to in the lake. We don't just have 7 launch points on Lake George. We actually have 86 trailered launch points on Lake George, which was a little bit tricky for us to get our hands around. So we actually staff the biggest launches on Lake George: $1 Million Beach, Rogers Rock State Campground, Mossy Point State Launch, Norwal, which is the largest private marina. But all of those other facilities that actually launch boats, all the motels and the marinas, we have agreements with those folks that say you're going to make sure that there's an inspection seal in place before you launch that boat. They're not doing actual inspections. All they're doing is looking to see if the seal is in place. They clip the seal, they keep the seal, they write it in the logbook, and they're all done. We had a big marina meeting prior to putting this program in place, and we got pretty much unanimous support from the folks that understand that prevention of Lake George really impacts the longevity and the viability of their business. And the program has been going very well so far. Very quick overview, Lake George. Total boater contacts, that's inspections on the way in, on the way out, and also some reseals. So about 27,000 boater contacts that we had this year. We're able to reduce our cost from the first year to this year because we know how many boaters are ballpark coming to each of the inspection sites, and we can staff it more appropriately. We are still finding, even after all the outreach that everybody's doing on this effort, our webinar hosts and all the great people that are going to be talking next, there's a lot of information out there, but we're still seeing invasive species being transported around New York State. So far, last year we found 144. This year we found at least 97. Those other samples are probably going to come back all positive as well. And our decontamination rate, the people that aren't bringing their boats clean, drained, and dry, some would argue it's really good that 6 out of 7 boats coming are clean, drained, and dry. Some might say we're still having 16% of our boats that aren't clean, drained, and dry. That doesn't mean that they guarantee that they have invasive species on them. They're just at higher risk. Sienna Research did a poll on whether folks thought this program was important for Lake George. And you see the results. 96% of the boaters that were surveyed on this, conducted solely by Sienna, thought the program was important or very important, and 92% support a long-term implementation of this program. We think a lot of that is we've been able to make the program very efficient, and thanks to our local support and our support in the Environmental Protection Fund, we've been able to keep the cost at zero for boaters. Where are folks coming from to Lake George? They are all over the map. The last water body that people have come to, we record in our data logger as people go to our inspection site. And we're looking at 420 different water bodies people came to as the last water body before coming to Lake George. That's a huge amount of folks coming from all over the place, and a lot of the lakes that people are coming from tend to have invasive species in them. So this is a pretty stark slide showing that, yeah, we do have boaters not just coming to Lake George from all over the place, but all of your lakes as well. So what was the impact on the boating public? So we have the inspection sites at the largest launches on Lake George, so boaters don't have to go out of their way. The inspection time takes anywhere from 3 to 5 minutes in general, depending on the size of the boat and the complexity. Decontamination time, if it does need a power wash and a rinse, that takes about anywhere between 8 and 10 minutes. And again, there's no cost to the boater. One of the early questions was, are we going to be driving boaters away from Lake George? Is this going to be so onerous, so expensive, so problematic we're driving people away? We paid very good attention to that. We have a captive audience of boaters on Lake George. If you're coming to Lake George, there is a boat registration fee, so we know all the folks that are coming. And these are the registration numbers. So the green ones are 2012 and 2013. Before we had the program, we implemented the program in 2014, and 2015 was the second year. And actually, our boat registrations have gone up on Lake George since we put the program in place. So we're not driving boaters away because of this program. We also wanted to get data on when are people coming to Lake George, and we want to make sure the cost is reasonable and that the program is reasonable. So as you can see, the low cost per inspection equates to the fact that we have inspectors on board and we have a lot of boaters coming. But as you look towards the right-hand side of the graph, you see those costs per inspection really go through the roof because we have very few boaters coming, but we still need to staff these sites. So taking that information, we're going to be modifying our program for the future to a little bit shorter of a season, from May 1st to November 1st, as opposed to April 15th to December 1st like it is right now. because the science says there's not a lot of invasives moving around in November because the plants have died back. There's nothing really spawning at that time of the year, and there's very few boaters, so a common sense approach is let's hit the boaters when we need to, when they're all coming to Lake George and they're moving around. So these are our costs. They're not insignificant, but the costs are coming down for what we have on Lake George. So we've gotten our staff costs down to about 30% less than the original projection for the program, and we anticipate moving this program into the future years, and we're going to be about 25–26% less than we'd originally thought, which we're very happy with. It's a government program. They don't always come down in cost as things progress, but we've had very good cooperation with everybody working around the lake on this. We're able to keep those costs what we think are fairly reasonable. So where do we get our money? The state of New York provides half of the funding through the Environmental Protection Fund. The other half, amazingly enough, is coming from local sources, the local towns, the county, and the nonprofit groups around Lake George. So this is a state agency and a state regulation, but the local organizations are the one that stepped up first and said, this is important enough for us to do. We will put up half the cost of this program to make sure that we're not charging an exorbitant fee for folks to come to Lake George for this inspection program, this prevention program. And we have a commitment from the chairman of this local organization, Mayor Blaze, who said, you know what, we're going to fund half of the cost of this program for at least the next 3 years, which is an amazing thing to say, and that gives Albany the information it needs to say, you know what, this is important enough to work on a partnership basis and to keep it flowing for the future. There is a website that we have to learn a little bit more about it. It's called LakeGeorgeBoatInspections.com, and you can learn kind of the ins and outs of the program and how it's working. So that's all what we're doing in Lake George, but how does this apply to you? Can small lakes go mandatory should you choose to do so? Steward programs are fantastic. The next step up in prevention is a mandatory effort, and the answer to the question is yes. For example, Loon Lake in Warren County, just north of us, as the commission was moving forward a 2 to 3 year process, the town of Chester in Warren County said, you know what, this is an important program. We're learning a lot about it. We have one municipal launch and one marina launch. We're going to run a mandatory program for Loon Lake, and they got it done in about 3 months. And they bought one $25,000 unit. They staff it for a cost of about $20,000 to $25,000 per year, and they run a mandatory inspection program for Loon Lake, and that's also very well publicly supported because they're also struggling with existing invasive species in that lake. So there's ways to do that. I'm available to have those conversations. Fred Monroe is the town supervisor up there, very actively engaged in these issues. I'm sure he'd be happy to talk to you as well. So that's the quick summary of the boat inspection program on Lake George. It is a little bit different because we do have a state agency solely focused on Lake George, but there are ways to go from what you might have right now, which may be nothing, it may be a steward program, and then again, that next step may be a mandatory program if it's the right fit for you. The commission's here to help you out, answer any questions that you might have. So I appreciate your time and effort, and I look forward to the rest of the presentations.
Okay, thanks again. So our next presenter today is going to be Megan Phillips. Megan began working for Parks in the spring of 2014 when she was hired to coordinate the agency's Watercraft Inspection Steward program. The program currently encompasses 23 boat launches across the Great Lakes Basin and is in plans to expand their range into the Finger Lakes in 2016, which Megan will explain that more. So in addition to coordinating this program, Megan also is working on projects to help build disposal stations for aquatic invasive species at site parks statewide and promote public awareness of and compliance to the new aquatic invasive species boating regulations. She has her master's degree in water resources management and a bachelor's degree in conservation biology. Both of those are from the Wisconsin-Madison University. Prior to working for Parks, she was the executive director of a river conservation non-for-profit organization in Wisconsin as well.
All right. Well, thanks so much, Dave. I always love to hear about the Lake George program, one of the most sophisticated programs in the state. And Parks is a more new program. We just started in 2014. We've been pretty successful and constantly expanding, so I'm going to talk about that more throughout my presentation. In our first year, in 2014, we had 8 boat stewards and did about 7,000 inspections. In the second year, we had 10 stewards and did more than 13,000 inspections. So as you can see, we are definitely expanding our reach with the boater patronage and anglers at our boat launches, and hope to continue to do that. In 2014 alone, we removed over 600 specimens, I'll say, because they weren't necessarily all invasive, from boats that were launching or retrieving. So we feel like every time we are able to take plants or animals off a trailer or a boat or a motor, we're having small successes, and it's important to celebrate those. All right, so we're going to cover a lot of topics in 15 minutes, so bear with me, and if you have questions, I'd be very happy to answer them at the end, and I'll also put up a slide at the end with my email address and also the email address for the lead boat steward, Patty Wakefield Brown, and she would be happy to talk to you as well. So we're going to go over our sites that we are present and have stewards at, funding mechanisms, our annual working budget, staffing structure, our timeline of events for the year, data collection, our core projects, future plans, and advice for new programs. First and foremost, here's a map of where we've had stewards in 2014 and 2015. As you can see, it's a very widespread program. We have a rather large geographic scope. We have stewards on duty from Lake Erie, Niagara River, Lake Ontario, the St. Lawrence Seaway, and just last year we added a couple sites on Lake Champlain. So we are constantly reassessing the sites that we have selected and determining whether or not it's the best use of our funds. In 2014, we had a steward who worked up in the Messina area at Robert Moses State Park and a couple other parks nearby, and he just didn't get hardly any action all summer. He didn't even see an invasive species, so we decided to pull those sites from the program in 2015. We did add Eastern Lake Ontario, which was an area previously covered by the New York Sea Grant Boat Steward Program, and since they've moved to the train-the-trainer model, we were able to take on those sites. We do prefer to be at state parks-owned sites. However, occasionally we have someone at a DEC launch or a municipal launch, just depending on boater traffic and the most strategic sites for us to be at. So our sites are staffed from 8 a.m. to 6:30 p.m. Thursday through Sunday, so that's 40 hours a week. Some stores do cover more than one site. So for example, in Alexandria Bay, up on the St. Lawrence Seaway, one steward would cover 5 launches in that area, so she would go to a different site each day. The ever important question of funding. So for the first 2 years, 2014 and 2015, we had received a grant from the Great Lakes Restoration Initiative through the Environmental Protection Agency, and we had a grant for $410,000, quite a large grant amount, to administer the program over its first 2 years. So we're actually still operating under that grant. We got an extension to keep working until April 2016 when the state's fiscal year starts up and we're able to transition into our new funding. The grant has been awesome. There are some downsides to working through grant funding. The application process is rather time-consuming. There are quarterly reporting requirements, and they're not overly tedious or anything, but for a smaller lake association that doesn't necessarily have paid staff, they are a bit cumbersome. In April 2016, we're going to move the program over, at least partially, to be funded through Ocean and Great Lakes funds, which is federal money that's administered through the Department of State to state agencies. We did put in an application for another Great Lakes Restoration Grant, and I won't know if we're successful in our application until potentially the end of this year, but also we might not know until the beginning of next year, which is why we have a backup funding source. All right, so I'm going to cover our 2014-15 annual budget. I know Dave threw out some figures too, and I just don't want people to be put off by what seems like a high cost for running a Steward program, because it definitely can be done for less. Our program has one coordinator, that's me. Right now we have one lead steward, which is Patty Wakefield Brown, and last year we hired 10 boat stewards. So just for 1 year, the cost per steward is at $15,000. We hire them for 20 weeks, and we pay them $12.52 an hour, which is pretty comparable to other steward programs throughout the state. We do have a rather high fringe rate of 55.48%. Fringe is a part of the budget that you definitely can't ignore or forget to put into your grant application. Coming from the nonprofit world, I know that I had overlooked that early in my career, and it was definitely an eye-opener, so it's important to keep that in mind. We spend a fair amount of money on supplies and travel also. In 2015, the cost for stewards to have supplies for 10 stewards was $8,000. That included uniforms, informational handouts, promotional materials that we had printed out like bobbers, keychains, sunglasses, straps. All of these were imprinted with the Stop Aquatic Hitchhikers logo. Tables, chairs, canopies for stewards who are at sites that don't have access to shade. It's a long day in the sun if you don't have any shade. We also spend a fair amount on travel, about $7,000 per year. This includes travel associated with our training. Last year we trained at Paul Smith College, so we had to secure hotel rooms for the stewards for that 2-day training. The core projects, which I'll talk about later, any meals associated with training or group events, funds for the coordinator, myself, and Patty to go around and visit the stewards while they're on site during the season. We try to at least visit them bi-weekly. Attendance at conferences. Patty and I are going to be presenting a poster at the North American Lake Management Society meeting conference next week in Saratoga, so perhaps we'll see some of you there. The rental car for the lead steward, which is absolutely crucial for her to be able to get around to all the different corners of the state like you saw on our map. And this year we did a mileage reimbursement for stewards. That's totally optional. We just had some extra grant money and wanted to be able to compensate the stewards. Some of them had driven, over 1,000 miles throughout the summer between different launch sites, and they knew taking the job that we wouldn't be able to pay them back for that, but since the money became available, we decided to do that. So our total annual budget is $285,000, and that includes the fringe costs. And moving on to our staffing structure. So this is from 2015 when we had 10 stewards on. So the program coordinator works in Albany, and I'm responsible for supervising the lead steward, and I co-supervise the seasonal boat stewards when they're on duty. I conduct the boat launch site visits, organize the trainings, manage the program budget, manage and analyze data, and submit project reports and quarterly financial reporting to the Environmental Protection Agency. Patty's job entails directly supervising the stewards when they're on duty, visiting the stewards weekly if possible, helping me to plan and implement the trainings, corresponding with the stewards on a daily basis, because the first couple of weeks they have a lot of questions, and they're all good questions, but someone needs to be available to answer them. Purchasing and replenishing the steward supplies as they're handing things out. She makes sure that they have enough educational materials, and conducting data quality control and quality assurance after the data has been collected. So we're in that phase right now. We also had 10 boat stewards working across the Great Lakes. They conducted the inspections, collected data, talked to the patrons about AIS, participated in group projects, which I'll talk about more later, and did public outreach at fishing tournaments and other relevant events throughout the summer. We also have regional staff at parks, and they play an important role in this program. The regional directors just have general oversight of the program and can recommend their busiest boat launch sites for us to cover. The park managers are on-site supervisors for the stewards that can respond to emergencies that might come up, or if someone is charging their tablet using their car and then has their battery die. That has happened. They also recommend launches for coverage, and the admin staff, which are kind of the unsung heroes of this program. They put the stewards on the payroll and enter the time cards and issue checks. So here's a snapshot of our annual timeline. As you can see, even though it's a seasonal program, we are working all year round, and there's always something to do. So this is from 2015, and there's a big shaded out spot over October because I was out for that whole month. But right now we're in November. You can see what we're working on is data analysis, report writing, and program evaluation. And program evaluation is something that I really want to focus more on as we move forward. I need to develop a plan for that. So as early as January, we're out there posting our employment announcements and looking at applications as they come in. We're doing interviews by March. We like to have our hiring done in April. And then in May, we're training and we're off and running by Memorial Day. We collect data about every patron that we interact with. This is really important. Helps us to inform future years of the program and also learn a bit about boater behavior and possibly make recommendations for management. So there are some pros and cons to the two different types of data collection we've done. The first year we had paper data sheets, and the problem there was that handwriting. Handwriting could be really difficult to decipher. Patty can attest to this definitely because she spent a lot of time entering the handwritten data sheets into our electronic database. So in 2015, we moved to using Samsung Galaxy tablets. We used the Tab 4 model with the 10-inch screen. To purchase 15 of those tablets and really heavy-duty cases, it was about $5,000. So with the tablets, we're using an electronic data form, and all of the data forms that are collected are sent to a cloud database for storage. We did encounter some issues. We didn't realize we were going to collect twice as much data as last year, so when I went to download the data, our storage quota had been exceeded, so I had to troubleshoot that, but it was our first year using the cloud storage, and I think that moving forward, we have it mostly figured out. So I would recommend, if your program can afford it, it cuts down on any errors associated with transcribing the data, and it makes the QA/QC process much easier. So I've been talking about these core projects. That's something that the stewards actually requested. In 2014, the feedback forms from our stewards showed that they really wanted to get together again later in the season. As you can see on the map, they're spread out across the state, and they didn't really get to see each other again after training unless they happened to, be both working at an event like Tonawanda Canal Fest or something like that. So what Patty and I did was put together stewards to come from all corners of the state to work at Selkirk Shores State Park for 2 days. The strike team and then also other staff from Environmental Management Bureau identified a rather large water chestnut infestation. As you can see from this photo, it's quite expansive in the marsh at Selkirk Shores. So what we did was we went out in kayaks that were generously donated by Oswego Expeditions and hand-pulled water chestnut for 2 days. We had, more than 20 people show up. We had our stewards, 10 stewards, Patty and myself, folks from Oswego County Soil and Water Conservation Department, and then just some general volunteers who wanted to come out and help with this. So in total, we removed 240 garbage bags of wet biomass, which equated to about 9,600 pounds. And we were able to make a little bit of a dent in that infestation. We're definitely coming back next year because there's more to do. But something like this, a project that all the stewards could get together and focus on, really improved team morale, and we felt like it was a huge success. And we're taking care of, this problem at the park that left unchecked could get really out of control. So I think we caught it early enough that we will be able to manage it with hand harvesting over the next couple of years. These are just some photos from the day.
Hi, Megan. Can you wrap up in about 1 minute?
Yep, I am on my last 2 slides.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Yep. Okay, so here's our plan for future coverage. The area that we're adding is the Finger Lakes. So there's 7 launches that have been identified there by the regional director, and we're hoping to staff those launches in 2016. So advice to new programs. Definitely don't bite off more than you can chew. I mean, I have a colleague, Samantha Epstein, who started a program in the Lower Hudson Valley this past year, and she has 2 stores. And, you know, that might be a good size for starting. It's definitely a lot more to manage than you expect. Lay out guidelines for your stores early. We didn't do that the first year, and then stores were taking quite a bit of time off. So now we tell them you only get 4 days off for the whole summer. Everyone wants weekends off, but that's when the boat launches are the most busy, so we need people on staff. Avoid reinventing the wheel. I'm happy to share anything from our program, so get in touch with me. And make sure when you're doing your hiring that you're honest about the nature of the position. Stores need to be able to work independently. They need to be self-motivated, and you can't get someone who's uneasy about talking to the public, because that is what the job entails, and we really need outgoing, informative people to be our boat stewards. And here's our contact information. Thank you very much, and don't hesitate to get in touch with us. We're definitely looking to help out these programs that are up and coming across the state. There you go, Britt.
Great. Thank you, Megan. That was, again, Megan Phillips from New York State Parks. And our next presenter is going to be a little bit smaller of a program. It's Freeman from Conesus Lake Steward Program. Real quick, I just want to remind everybody that you can submit your questions through the chat box on the right-hand side of your screen, or in the question and answer panel also on the right-hand side of the screen. And we will be approaching all the questions at the end. So quick introduction for our next presenter. Freeman has been with Cooperative Extension since 1982. He graduated from the University of Tennessee in Knoxville with a degree in animal science and received his master's in agriculture and extension education from, again, the University of Tennessee in Knoxville. He worked for Extension in Tennessee and then Oregon before coming to Livingston County in 2005 as the executive director. He works closely with the Association's Board of Directors to oversee the organization's fiscal, personnel, and program management. He also works with other executive directors within the 7-county region, so Ontario, Schuyler, Seneca, Steuben, Wayne, and Yates counties, to help manage the Finger Lakes Shared Business Network.
To give you a little bit of the history of this, Cornell Cooperative Extension of Livingston is a very small nonprofit / sub-governmental agency, and what we tend to do is try to educate people. Well, the Conesus Lake Association came to us to say, hey, they were a part of a grant earlier in 2013 and said, we really want the Invasive Steward program to continue at our one launch site on Conesus Lake. When you look at Conesus Lake, it's one of the small Finger Lakes. We have one big, I should say, larger launch site. There's 3 actually, but this is the only one that really can maintain trailers. So we worked with them, and they brought us some dollars. Not a great deal, and I'll talk about that later. We have a really great working relationship with the county government, and as well as they do, and so they got the Watershed Council to put in a few more dollars, and hence we decided we would move forward with it. Conesus Lake is just outside of Rochester, but as you look at the lake, there's no really large metropolitan cities real close to it. There's a lot of ag land, but there's a high population of houses on the lake itself, and there's a lot of rental properties on the lake. So you get a lot of people moving in and out each week. So there's a lot of people that bring their boats and come and go as the week goes on, and so the Lake Association is very proud of their particular lake, and they have a vested interest in it. So when we sat down and started talking, they not only volunteered some dollars, but some expertise as well. One of their members is also a professor at SUNY Geneseo College, and he had been on our board of directors. So he and I and they started working together. So we had a really core group that could work together and move forward with this particular program. If one thing that you don't get out of anything on this, ask for help. This is one of those that Sea Grant is a wonderful partner to work with. The Parks Department is wonderful to work with. The other folks that have these programs, when they offer their assistance, they're really willing to help. So that's what I would say big time message is, don't try to do it alone. But like I say, this is our staff. We have a coordinator that does a phenomenal job. She's been with our program for 2 years and the prior program for 1. We reached out because we are at the lake itself. We have a nature center that we work with, a nonprofit nature center, and we do educational programs there, and that's why we got tied into this, is that we already had a presence on the lake. We already had working relationships on the lake. So therefore, hiring some more people to do more education wasn't a stretch for us at all. In fact, it's part of our mission base. So in summertime, we use a lot of workforce development staff in other programs. So we reached out to them and said, hey, can we utilize a workforce development intern to work with us to try to stretch the hours? They did it. And so the first year we did 2, and we found out you can overstaff a site. It got to be where there was some dead time, and they started, we had too many people there. So hence this year we had 1. He learned a great deal, and once again it goes back to that core workforce development components of being able to introduce yourself, being able to interact, being able to work with people, and be able to tell them this is what you need to do to improve, this is what we're looking for. And so that was really a plus. It stretched our dollars a lot further so that we had more coverage. I can't overemphasize what has already been said about making sure your stewards understand that they're going to work on the weekends and that you will only have so many weekends off. That was what's been nice about this program also, is that we try to put in a sub, and therefore they rotate in and out, and so somebody can take off a weekend, because we run our program from Memorial Day through Labor Day, and some people just need to have a little rest over the weekend, or they have families that they want to interact with. So put a little reality in there in your budget to do this. You'll notice that they're setting on a disposal. This is very valuable. They came in a lot of times in the mornings, and there was organic material already in it. Giving them the opportunity to police themselves is a huge opportunity, and a lot of them don't know where to put it. And having something like this up that's a self-educational display, it helps out a great deal as the program moves forward. We talk about the training component of this. It's a key, but we didn't do a great deal of training because we have such a small staff. Some of the training went with our coordinator, did it on site. A lot of times it was the refreshers that we did. We also tried to get the coordinator. We hired her earlier in the year, per se, and she tried to write some grants to try to put us to extend it a little bit further to stretch our dollars. We were successful with an Earth Day grant of $500, and it helps. The little things do help. One of the other things is the working relationship with the Lake Association. It was a very positive feature, and they helped us with the evaluation. And as we talked about the tablets earlier, we've tried to put those into our program, and It's really nice because we had the paper version, and then we had the volunteer from the Lake Association who did our data management for us. He liked going to the tablets. It wasn't a huge increase in the cost on the one site, but you will need to have two so that you can pass off, or somebody can be doing one as they exit and one as they enter. But we've had great success. We really haven't had any pushback from hardly anybody. We do train our stewards that if it's a dangerous scenario, don't enter it, back out. In our particular area, it's not mandated, so don't take the risk. And once again, we make them wear these red shirts and red caps. It's a big component of visibility, and once you create that atmosphere, the Lake Association as well as the boaters, they come to know you at this small launch, and it's a working relationship that does exceptionally well. We did get a few more dollars this year, and it's amazing when you stretch outside of the traditional Friday, Saturday, Sunday. We had fishing tournaments on Tuesday. We had to get there we found out at 5 o'clock in the morning to really be able to cover the fishing tournaments, or they wanted us more there at 4, but you know, there's a little way in there about management of staff and time, but that was one of the big days that we had. You may want to ask, well, what's a big day? Well, we had about 5,000 contacts over that short period of time, and on Tuesday we got 400 contacts, and once again, most of those were fishermen. When you break down our strategic or our contact list, we're running about 50-50, pretty close to fishermen and recreation. We really couldn't disseminate or discern between the two a great deal because both of them brought in organic material. The fishermen are going from lake to lake to lake. They do a really good job. However, the recreational folks, they did it. We had about 10% almost, which was a drop considerably from the year before of almost 15% of those risky launches that had the organic material. We do try to track all the different launch points that they come from, and we've actually put into our tablet where if a person comes from a specific area, we know what to look for from that lake or the Erie Canal or whatever to make sure that we focus in on that boat maybe a little harder because it is from a suspect area. That's a huge component that we've improved upon. But what a lot of the people now I think want to look at is our bottom line. We don't spend more than $14,000 a year on the whole Steward program. Like I say, the volunteers help us out dramatically. We share a lot of our resources. We work with other agencies. We're not a standalone by a long stretch, but these are the real dollars that we put into our program and get out. I did not put in the workforce development budget per se because they cover the cost of that for the youth in the program. So it moves back and forth pretty easily. The hours that we plug in, we almost get 1,000 hours in, and we spend almost $1,000. We spend almost 11,000 of our 13,000 on labor. So we try to institute those components. We did get the Earth Day grant that helped us a little bit with our printing materials this year, and like I said before, it's really neat to work in a community that it's vested. And I go back to 2 years ago, we had a blue-green algae bloom. Within about 3 hours of the confirmation from the health department, we were passing out booklets and pamphlets on blue-green algae for those people that were launching so that the people who were renting may not have known what it was or what it could do, but it was to inform them to look out for it. So I think that's been more on the structure. I could get into a lot of the other stuff, but what we're going to be moving forward to in the future, we did get a grant through Senator Young's office, and we will be having a wash station this coming year, so we've got some more learning curves to go through, and we will be visiting other sites to learn from y'all about how we can institute this more effectively in ours. So that's what I had to talk about.
Okay, so for our final presenter for the day is Eric Holmlund. Eric currently serves as the interim dean of the School of Commercial, Applied, and Liberal Arts at Paul Smith College. He has served as Professor of Environmental Studies Program and Director for Environmental Studies, Liberal Arts, and Recreation. He is the Director of the Adirondack Watershed Institute Stewardship Program, which works to prevent the spread of aquatic invasive species on waterways across the Adirondack region. His research interests include narratives of environmental attachment and socio-political conflict in aquatic invasive species spread networks via overland transport of recreational watercraft.
Well, okay, good morning, everybody. I might have spoken with a couple of you last week on a webinar, so apologize if any of this is redundant. But I'd like to tell you a little bit about our program and offer us as a resource. We're willing to come to you and do in-services or consult or just share and learn from you too. So we learn from each interaction that we have with collaborators. So I know we're short on time here, so I'm going to move kind of quickly. This is the footprint of our program this past summer. The dots show where either boat decontamination stations were in yellow, or in purple, these were boat inspector stations without decon capacity. The dots that have other letters in them are our partner programs, including New York State Sea Grant, up on the northern part of Lake Champlain Basin Program, around really all of Lake Champlain, and the Lake George Park Commission with the L's, and then a couple of P's in Screwen Lake for the Loon Lake and Screwen Lake Association, who ran their own programs. So I think the great thing about this image shows that it's multiple agencies, multiple jurisdictions, multiple partners, all running programs that have potentially conflicting messages. So that it's important for us to kind of get together and train people jointly, which is what we do, so that everybody has a very similar protocol and message. The other point is, if you notice, there are quite a lot of yellow dots, and that's new this year. So we never before have we had the ability to refer dirty boats or boats that were at risk to any place other than a car wash to decontaminate their watercraft. This year, through unprecedented funding by Governor Cuomo in the Environmental Protection Fund, we were able to, with DEC, purchase equipment to be deployed strategically around the park. That point about it being deployed not randomly but strategically is really very important. Okay, so we had stewards, so this is just us, not including Lake Champlain, Basin Program, et cetera. Our stewards were at 56 different sites, and it's we call this a landscape scale program because we're kind of everywhere in the prism, with the exception of really outside the blue line. We're still getting there. Blue line meaning the Adirondack Park. So 11 decontamination stations that we ran, and several others that other agencies like Dave's program ran. Okay, so about 38,000 visitor groups, 93,000 visitor contacts traveling in those 38,000 groups. We're approximately 70 stewards, 3 administrators. Some of those stewards were kind of super stewards or supervisory stewards who split their duties between stewarding and mentoring others. We had 2 different kinds of sites, steward and decon sites, and about 45,000 watercraft inspected across the park, most of them motorboats. So we did, we did inspect canoes and kayaks. In addition, of course, and Dave is right, they transport any organism and aquatic invasive species at a far lower rate. But since we're there anyway, we inspect them. So these numbers are very common for us this past year. About 11% of inspections resulted in visible organisms. and well, just under 3% of the inspections found confirmed AIS, and these are numbers that have been consistent over our, we've been doing this for about 15 years, so these are consistent numbers. But there's tremendous variability between the sites. Some lakes are dirty, some lakes are clean, et cetera. About 1,000 visible confirmed AIS were removed at our 56 locations, mostly Eurasian water milfoil, and a few spiny water fleas and zebra mussels, mostly from Saratoga Lake. So what I'm showing you now is mind-boggling, I think, but don't pay attention to individual numbers. This is the scope of what we're doing across the park at these 56 sites. These are just the raw counts, and these are, as of today, they're going to be QC'd even more. There may be some small changes, but there's lots and lots of different data points, lots and lots of different types of watercraft that we're inspecting, and just lots of activity. What we found at these different sites, you can see, I think it's worth noting, maybe you can see my cursor. My cursor's going away. You can see that the percentage of boats that are dirty really did vary, and the percent of boats carrying AIS did vary tremendously from location to location. If you look at Chateauguay Lake, for instance, dirty boats carrying Eurasian water milfoil, Saratoga Lake is another spot of concern. A lot of the interior waterways of the Adirondacks don't have a lot of invasive species, but we're there to prevent them from getting invasive species. Okay, focus on our decon stations, and they functioned at varying levels of activity. We deployed these throughout the summer, so some were in June, some were in July, so we didn't have really a full summer of implementation. And also this summer was an awareness building summer where we were selling decontaminations a little lightly. I think next summer the DEC is going to encourage us to sell them a little more aggressively. So we decontaminated, this includes Hurricane, which wasn't our program. We decontaminated about 300 boats, about 150 or so were AWI or decontaminations performed by our employees. So we removed about 112 AIS from the decon stations, and this is what they were, mostly Eurasian water milfoil and a few zebra mussels. Okay. So the point of this next image is that we located through a cooperative and a collaborative process, working with local government, DOT, DEC, and the environmental organizations. We sited our decontamination stations at 3 different kinds of locations. Directly at some boat launches, about 4 of them were at boat launches. I don't know, 4 or so or 3 or so were at gateway or locations that were roadside on highways entering the Adirondacks, where our employees were there waiting with signs and attempting to get people to voluntarily pull off the highway and come in and get their watercraft inspected and decontaminated. And then the 3rd location was at intersections that were interior intersections. So our boat launch sites performed better in terms of the number of user contacts as would make sense. So we're getting kind of different yields from these different sites, but they're all important. So we have to decide what this bodes for the future. I would expect that boat launches will continue to be emphasized. So the public, as Dave Wick pointed out, we have similar responses. The public is overwhelmingly in support of this new park-wide boat inspection and decontamination program. We never had decontamination facilities capacity before this year, so we asked them, are you in favor of this park-wide boat inspection program? And 90% said yes, so a very strong positive public response. And we also asked, what spread prevention measures have you taken as a boat user prior to coming to this boat launch today? 70% said they did something. It's a little lower than usual, but we expanded this year to new locations, so that's expected that the new user groups will take a while to come on board. But they're doing a variety of spread prevention measures. So this shows that the public is paying attention and taking some action. So how we present our data and how we analyze it is critical to our program's history and our program's current impact and future success. So I know that all the administrators who talked today are doing this. I'm just kind of peeling back some of the information so you can see what we do as we grapple with this incredible amount of data. So this is a snapshot from last year's data, about 25,000 lines of Excel data, probably about 50 fields. So there's a tremendous wealth of information generated in a single year. The next frontier, this is also what we're doing, is we're merging all this data together into a multi-year databases. So before we get to that integrated level, this is what we do for each of the waterways that are participating in our program. So this is just a single lake diagnostic. It's a 3-page diagnostic summary of what we find each year. So this is just a formatting kind of example. So we want to show at a glance headlines. We also show, just the key questions that the stakeholder groups are going to ask. What came off the Watercraft, and where did the Eurasian water milfoil come from that could have come into our lake? So we asked, where the previous waterway was for each of the boats. So we can track this down. We can start seeing the interconnections between the waterways. This is page 2 of our 3-page report. We list the number of previous waterways, and then you can see a tremendous variety for Fourth Lake in particular. Lots of different previous visitations in the 1s and 2s. State, of course, is New York. And then we can see in the lower right some changes over time in terms of the AIS removed, spread prevention measures taken, number of watercraft, the traffic essentially. So that's very useful information for planning for the future. And then we generate a spread vector map for each of the waterways. We have got a GIS person who does wonderful work. So you can imagine, this is just one lake. We're going to have to do this year for, I shudder to think about this, maybe 50 of these maps. And then the idea is to see how these all mesh together in terms of a broader picture. So you layer these all together, and you start getting an analysis that shows how the incoming and outgoing visits function together in terms of creating a network of interconnections between waterways. So the diagram you see on the right is the 2014 version of the diagram. It's getting more complex each year, but essentially it shows that there are 3 subnetworks that we've identified around the Northway, the northern sort of High Peaks region of the Adirondacks, and then the Fulton Chain and the Western Adirondacks. So these are networks that have a lot of internal coherence, but then there also are breakout links that connect the networks to each other. Gives us an idea of where to put these decontamination stations and stewards. So our GIS person also overlaid these previous visitation data on road networks to give us a sense of where the at-risk boats are probably traveling in order to get to these lakes. And this gives us another indication of where to put decontamination stations or stewards. Okay, so I think we saw that. Oh, but the point about this is as you zero in on the upper right and lower right, you can see greater detail and basically sub networks that help us understand how boats are kind of hopping around, and pond hopping and lake hopping in our region. Okay, so moving along here. Okay, so other steward projects. Our program, I think, is kind of unique in that we don't just count the boats. We build into our staff plans and our budgeting the ability for stewards to spend about 1 day a week away from the boat launches doing value-added kinds of duties, including education and outreach, scientific studies in our labs, and scientific study out in the Adirondacks, in the woods and in the streams, collecting various environmental data. So this adds tremendous value to the experience of the employees. This is just a collage of some of the different projects that were away from the boat launches that our stewards were involved in this summer and last summer. We had stewards doing social media. We had stewards doing tick studies, looking at the spread of Lyme disease in the Adirondacks. So we're trying to look at watershed health writ large. Loon monitoring. We have a watershed model that we purchased in the lower left that is a tremendously interactive and visual tool that we've tabled at farmers markets and at schools. We participate in parades, and we do purple loosestrife control. We do Japanese knotweed control, bathymetric maps. So the stewards are really doing a whole lot of different things to add value to their summer and to add value to our program. So you may think, wow, how much does this program cost? And is it so incredibly expensive? I just saw Megan's 55% overhead rate, and I just was amazed and impressed by that, because our overhead rate keeps getting squeezed down. So we managed to, because of our scale, we managed to fund a lot of these projects, and our costs are about the same as the other programs per steward, about $15,000. But taking a look at our funding streams, you can see that we have lots of different stakeholders who want different things from our programs. So we're kind of a calico program, or a collage program. So foundations and associations, Lake Champlain Basin program are giving us a lot of money. The Great Lakes Restoration Program is our largest award, about $500,000. And then our New York State, actually no, it's not the largest. The New York State award is even larger this year for our spread prevention pilot program. This past summer then, our total funding was about $1.5 million. Okay, so about 13 to 15 per inspector. Somewhere around, and these are soft, I've got to refigure this, about 65% of our budget is steward wages. Our federal overhead rate is 28.8%, although we've been throttled down from that. This year, we have to only charge 5%, so we have to figure out ways to work through that. And about a 15-week season, although we expanded that this year as well too. We went until the middle of October at some lakes. So we emphasize the weekends. Okay, so equipment. The question was, what equipment do we have? iPads, tables, chairs, educational materials, uniforms, tents. The steward car that we don't supply, but having stewards that drive is very critical. We do reimburse for mileage for our stewards if they are, doing extraordinary kinds of travel, which a lot of them do. And we also have to locate and source a wireless-enabled meeting room for our weekly meetings at various locations across the park. So we're organized in these little subunits. So discussion. We're proud of what we think makes our program stand out is that it's old comparatively, been around since 2000. It's a full service program that includes spread prevention, but also active management, AIS monitoring, water chemistry monitoring, rapid response teams, scientific studies of various kinds, educational outreach. All these elements are synergized and coordinated together. I've got colleagues here at the AWI, Dan Kelting and Kathleen Wiley, who work with me, Leanne Sporn, to make sure that all of these projects fit together. Our boat launch stewards are also scientists. Our boat launch stewards are also public educators and social media folks as well. So it's very complex, but we think pretty rich. We also think that we're proud of that the public is changing the public culture and behavior in the Adirondacks. We're not greeted with skepticism or surprise like we were in the first few years. People are expecting to have uniform presence at the boat launches, and they expect that these are college students doing wonderful work. And we're not all college students, though, too. The other thing that we're proud of is working so closely with a wide range of collaborators in our PRISM, APIP, Lake Champlain Basin program, et cetera. You can see the list there. Our most important colleagues, to some extent, are our towns and villages and our local association members. So the other thing that we think is really important is data. 15 years of user data. We're merging it all together. We're incorporating data from Lake George and from Lake Champlain Basin program to look for these spread vectors. Our needs include to increase our networking with, especially with sportsmen's groups and chambers of commerce, and we need even better. We need to do a better job of marketing and getting our message out. We're really almost too much focused on what happens at the boat launches. We need to start doing a better job of social media, web development, those kinds of things, although we do have websites. Billboards is the next frontier. The year-to-year funding that we get or don't get, although we've been very fortunate, we never know, and that does lead to uncertainty and difficulty planning for multiple years. Again, once again, you can see the diversity of our funding streams. I'd like to acknowledge all these sources of funds and support and technical support, and also encouragement and volunteer hours. Okay, to respect everyone's time, I think I'm ending and am available for questions.
Okay, great. Thank you, Eric. All right, everybody. So thanks again for listening to the 4 presenters. I am going to go ahead and open up the screen for questions now. Some of the questions were answered throughout the program, so for those folks who aren't actually on the webinar itself and they're just calling in, a quick reread of those. Somebody asked for published literature information about how trailered boats are a primary vector. That was asked to Dave Wick, and if you're interested in getting that literature information or those citations, please email him. So another question was to Dave Wick, and the question was the one-time fee of $300,000 was mentioned. Is that pertaining to all 7 washing stations or per each station? And Dave's response was that the $300,000 was the total cost for all 7 of the stations, including the equipment and site work. So the next question, if everybody, all of the presenters, I'm going to unmute you guys. If everyone could just give a quick answer, the first question would be, how did you decide which hours of the week your boat stewards were going to cover launches? So the first one we'll go with Eric, if you want to answer that quickly.
How do we, the question was, how did we decide who went where and the hours? That was the question?
Yeah, what hours? How did you decide the days and hours of the week, the launches?
Well, part of it is through gathering data and tracking your data so that you can see what the patterns are to use levels. And part of it is to use the local on-the-ground intelligence given by collaborators and lake associations and the DEC. Just to observe. And part of it is also to be aware of special events, fishing tournaments, boat shows, those kinds of things, canoe races. So being aware of those sort of one-time only or repeating events that could require greater stewardship. So generally speaking, of course, Thursday, Friday, Saturday, Sunday tend to be high-use days at DEC campgrounds. Often people will be arriving on Fridays, so that's an opportunity to do campground checks. A lot of them will stay a week and then depart on Sundays. So just knowing that rhythm. So, but we do respond to public input and our stakeholders saying, hey, we really want you to extend your hours, on Friday evenings, let's say, and then we'll do that.
Okay, great. Bo, really quick, if you want to go ahead and explain how you guys decide your hours for the stewards and the days of the week at the launches.
Very similar. The Lake Association basically said, yeah, you got to do the weekends, and these are the events. Talking to the fishermen, finding out when the tournaments are, when the big events are going to be, just making sure that you got, ears on the ground and somebody that's watching it to find out when the launch is full and make sure that you're there. We did expand our hours a little bit, and it's dramatic in that how many more people you can get contact with or do the education to if you just extended another couple of hours in different times. Wednesdays are dead day. It just is when you really look at it. So, and then you got to skip around every now and then just to see what you're missing. And once again, you'll find out whether you're missing anything or not.
Okay, great. Megan?
Sure. I mean, I definitely echo what Eric and Bo have said. One thing that we do have to consider is that our supervisory staff starts every day at 8, so we don't like to have stewards come on before 8 o'clock because if they have a question about something and they text or call one of us, we might be still in bed or brushing our teeth or, trying to get out the door to get to work. So we don't want anyone to start before 8 unless it's a special event like a fishing tournament or something of that nature, and those get started pretty early. We also need to keep in mind that we like to have our stewards have a face-to-face contact when they're signing in and signing out, so we are a little bit constrained by what time park offices are open or ticket booths or somewhere where they can make a contact with the human beings so that the steward's accountable for their hours.
Great, that's actually an important note. So Dave, I'm going to unmute you now if you want to quickly, explain how you decide your scheduling and hours.
Sure. Since our program is mandatory, we need to provide maximum coverage at each of our inspection sites. So we're generally dawn till dusk or even a little bit later sometimes. So it's a little bit different than some of the programs that we're talking about, but that was key to the program. We can't show up at 8 or 9 o'clock in the morning if fishermen want to go out at 5 or 6 because they need to receive that inspection before they go. So that is, of course, impacted the cost of our program, but it's a necessary component, and we believe it's the right thing to do.
A quick question for expansion. I'm not sure if you know this off the top of your head, but do you guys have set hours with multiple stewards per day, or do you guys have one steward that covers the long day?
Are you talking about for the Lake George program?
Yep, for Lake George.
Yep, so we have a minimum of 2 inspectors at each of the inspection sites, and that goes up to 5 or 6 at the busiest points on the busiest weekends in the summertime. So that's kind of where we are.
Okay, great, thanks.
Yep.
All right, so the next question is for those programs who have switched from paper to tablets. Have you found a major difference in the return of responses from voters with the paper form versus the paper form surveys or the electronic form? Dave, since you're unmuted, if you want to go ahead and explain anything that you've learned from going from paper to tablets.
For us, we actually took a page out of Eric's book in terms of his data management. So we had the benefit of Eric Holmlund's program. So we switched very quickly from our pilot program, which was paper, to our legal mandatory program, which is all done on tablet. And in terms of data administration, based on the volume of boats that we have, it has been absolutely staggering the amount of time saved by going with the tablet format. And Eric can address the specifics of it, but it works extremely well. I would encourage anybody that's starting a program to really look into that very quickly. It's fairly inexpensive, and at the end of the day, you'll have a much better result.
Oh, I think Dave covered it. It's at this point, there's although it's tempting to use paper, and the employees want to use paper at times when they're overwhelmed. We do our best to keep them from using paper, but it absolutely transformed our ability to look at the data real time, almost daily. You can see the data, and to share that data and to respond to what we're seeing and to quality control it on a weekly basis. You really have to go that route.
All right. Well, we didn't really get that much of a change in response from voters when we made the switch to the electronic tablets. I did see that somebody had asked about what program we were using, and I don't know if you want me to speak to that really quickly. It's called Open Data Kit. It's free to use, and if the person who had a question about that wants to shoot me an email, I'd be happy to get you all set up with building your electronic data form and speaking to the person who is really an expert in helping people build those.
Great, thank you. So the next question that we're going to move on to is, do your stewards find that disposal bins collect unwanted items and it's like trash in your disposal bins? Bo, this question was directed at you. I'm going to go ahead and unmute you if you want to answer that for me.
Yes, you'll always get some, but all the stewards were amazed that we didn't come up with a whole bunch of garbage. And we're at a state park, and once again, cleaning up is not extensively hard. Put it into garbage bags per se, and it's gotten rid of that way. And if we're not there for an extended period of time, it dries out exceptionally well too.
Great, thank you. So the next question, I saw that Dave answered this in the chat box. So the question is, have any of your programs that are doing decontamination inadvertently damaged a boat?
All right, well, we didn't really get that much of a change in response from voters when we made the switch to the electronic tablets. I did see that somebody had asked about what program we were using, and I don't know if you want me to speak to that really quickly. It's called Open Data Kit. It's free to use, and if the person who had a question about that wants to shoot me an email, I'd be happy to get you all set up with building your electronic data form and speaking to the person who is really an expert in helping people build those.
Great, thank you. So the next question that we're going to move on to is, do your stewards find that disposal bins collect unwanted items and it's like trash in your disposal bins? Bo, this question was directed at you. I'm going to go ahead and unmute you if you want to answer that for me.
Yes, you'll always get some, but all the stewards were amazed that we didn't come up with a whole bunch of garbage. We're at a state park, and once again, cleaning up is not extensively hard. Put it into garbage bags per se, and it's gotten rid of that way. And if we're not there for an extended period of time, it dries out exceptionally well too.
Great, thank you. So the next question, I saw that Dave answered this in the chat box. So the question is, have any of your programs that are doing decontamination inadvertently damaged a boat while doing the decontamination? If yes, how is this addressed? So Dave said that they've done over 3,000. They have not done that yet. So the next question is, who is physically washing or removing the plant material, or is there concern about liability? Dave, I'm going to open this up to you about the decontamination if you would like to answer that.
Yeah, liability for the whole program was a concern. So we have the benefit of having had 6 years of steward program and understood the Lake George Association's liability, and then moving it to a mandatory program and now understanding our liability for it. So there is inherent liability with anything that we're doing, whether a steward is climbing on a boat and slips off, or whether they cut themselves on a propeller, or whether they do damage to a boat during decontamination. So that's something that has to be looked into. For steward programs, I would direct folks, if anybody else on the call with experience in this, or Walt Lender at the Lake George Association, to talk about exactly what type of policy they have in place for a steward-based program. Ours, we're a state agency, but we actually did have to buy a separate policy because this isn't a normal level of coverage. And so we haven't had any claims against the program, which is great, but it is something that you need to look into a little bit.
Great, thank you, Dave. So at this point, that is all of the questions for today. I'd like to, again, thank Dave, Megan, Bo, and Eric for presenting, and everybody who is attending today for the current Watercraft Inspection Program Model session. It is focused on serving those programs that are serving the Adirondack region, Conesus Lake, Lake George, and waters that belong at state parks around New York State. So after this presentation, we have one more to go, and that is next Friday at 9 a.m. It's not a Thursday, so it's next Friday, November 20th at 9 a.m. We will have presentations from Nancy Connolly and Dave White on what anglers and boaters know and still need to hear about aquatic invasive species, and also watercraft inspection legislation and regulations. In the spring, we will be having a workshop at the NICE-FOLA conference, that New York State Federation of Lake Association conference. So if anyone is interested in that, again, you can email me, contact me at any point in time if you have questions about presentations. So again, I wanted to thank everybody on behalf of New York Sea Grant, the Watercraft Inspection Steward Program Training Planning Team, our presenters, and everybody who has joined us. I hope that the information and dialogue has been valuable to you today, and I hope it helps support your work. So again, please feel free to join in next week on Friday at 9 a.m. for the 2 presentations, the final 2 of our webinar series, and go ahead and get online onto the website and check out the information. If you have any questions, please feel free to contact me. Thanks again for joining us today.
Thanks, Brittney.
Thanks, Brittney.
Thanks.